I was born in 1961, which means that from my perspective, I feel like I grew up in Tomorrowland. My family lived in Southern California, so we got to go to Disneyland a fair amount when I was young. So we would go to Disneyland and experience Tomorrowland. And there were a lot of things about when I was growing up, I felt like I was literally living in Tomorrowland. This is, if you remember or have seen pictures of what Tomorrowland looked like in that era, these were some of the original attractions. You had the mover. Yeah. I used to work for Disney, and that was the joke, it was the mover. You had the monorail, the submarine, you had the flying saucers, those cars, and then you had, after the 60s, you had Space Mountain. But what was amazing was the genius of Walt Disney was he knew that all of these lands, you could go into Adventureland or Frontierland, or you could go into Tomorrowland and really feel like you were living in tomorrow, like you were futurizing yourself to be in tomorrow. In fact, there was a ride, it's not there anymore, but if you recall, and it was a Monsanto ride, I think, where they would make it where you were miniaturized. Do you guys remember that ride?
You bet.
Yeah, you'd see, and I remember as a kid just being like wide-eyed, like I'd go and look at this little microscope it looked like the people who'd been miniaturized who were about to be injected into inner space, and I thought that was real. Like I thought when we got in these cars, that was gonna really happen. So for me, this was the era that I felt like, as I grew up as a child, that anything was possible. Mm-hmm. That's my takeaway from that growing up. So the title of my talk is Age of Wonder. Age of Wonder, to me, summarizes how I felt about when I was growing up. I mentioned born in 61, which means I know exactly where I was when this happened. July of 1969, a human being set foot on the moon less than 7 years after we decided that that's what we were going to do. Mm-hmm. Does that seem phenomenal to you, that we could decide we're going to do something that stupendous, and 7 years later, this is happening? If you experience that, you probably all know. In fact, raise your hand if you remember where you were when you saw that. Just so everyone knows, online, almost every single hand, if you were alive then, you knew exactly where you were and that happened. I was up in Minnesota at my aunt and uncle's house on a lake, and we were all gathered around the set listening to Walter Cronkite show us this. So to me, anything was possible in that age. And when you think about what was possible for your future, the future seemed like it was Tomorrowland. You could look around, and in the 60s, everyone had this consciousness that anything was possible. And there was one thing, though, that we were all obsessed with. We all were certain this thing was going to happen. And it was funny, around that time, there were TV shows, the movies, 2001 came out that told us this is what the future is going to look like. I remember a show called Space 1999. So for some reason, the year 2000 in the 60s seemed like, oh my gosh, so much is going to be possible in that year. And the one thing, though, back in the 50s and 60s that we were so obsessed about was flying cars. We all thought the future would have to have something that looked like this, where there was a flying car, and you would fly around, and it would just take you everywhere. And if you watched any movie that was set in the future, there were flying cars. Blade Runner, a little bit dystopic, but every single thing you could point to said, yes, this is possible for us in the future. So we all were imagining that there were going to be flying cars. They might have looked like this. If you turned on your TV set in the 1960s, you absolutely got a taste of what this would look like, because this is one of the top shows. The Jetsons, right? Everybody remembers the Jetsons. And it's funny, the show starts off with him in his flying car, dropping off his kids and his wife, and then he goes into work, and that was our vision of what was possible. So, how did you all get here today when you arrived at the center? Did you arrive in a flying car? No. So what happened? Why did we not get the thing that we thought was going to happen? So as I was thinking about this, I go, well, is it that we grew up? Was it that when I was growing up and I thought Tomorrowland was the reality that I lived in, was it the problem that, that's just something that you think about when you're a kid, and as you get older, that goes away? And so I asked the question, is age of wonder an actual age? Do you let go of it? Do you get to be like 10 or 12 years old and your family, society, race consciousness tells you like, oh, you know what? That was all, your life is not an e-ticket ride, sorry. So is it an age of wonder? Or is it a mindset? I think it's more the latter. I think the idea that the choices about how we look about the future and our future is how we choose to look at it. So I go back to that idea of flying cars. And one of the things that's funny, especially with flying cars, there was a phrase that just came into my head as I was thinking about this, that you would often hear people say about flying cars. And this was the phrase, I was promised flying cars. Meaning, there was this idea that we had an expectation from when we were little kids about what the future would look like. We get there, and it's not there. What happened? I was promised that there would be flying cars in the future. This was such a prevalent idea, and I'm going to play a little video here in a second, that in the year 2000, IBM, a tech company, created an ad using this exact phrase. I'm going to play a short bit of this ad here so you get a feeling of it.
It is the year 2000, but where are the flying cars? I was promised flying cars. I don't see any flying cars. Why? I was promised flying cars. I don't see any flying cars. Why?
Why? I love that. I actually added in a few more of the whys because it amused me so much. But it's interesting. If you think about, listen to what he's saying, that the energy that he has about him. I was promised this. Where are they? Why did I not get them? There's a sense of, is it entitlement? The idea of I was expecting this thing to happen outside of me and it hasn't happened, and now I'm mad. Now I'm mad that thing hasn't happened. And so we start to say things like, why don't I have this? I was supposed to get. Why didn't I get? Or even worse, how come they got it and I didn't? So we're creating all these ideas in our head of what I wanted is outside of me, under someone else's control, and I didn't get it. So it became such a joke that in even today, you'll see this idea of a meme where there's what we were promised, so that's the ideal of what we thought was going to happen, and then there's the what we actually got. So we were promised flying cars, and what we got is an ugly-looking Hugo. That is, if you Google like worst cars ever, the Hugo, sadly for Yugoslavia, is an example of the worst car ever. So this is you'll probably see this a lot around like December 31st, where we're like, I'm so excited for the year ahead. And then January 3rd, like, oh my God, and so we do this where we know what the ideal is that we want, and we then go, but here's what we actually got. So the question I have is, when we say, I was promised flying cars, I was promised anything, is who promised you? Do you ask that question? When we go, I was promised, the implication is it's someone outside of you that said you would get this thing or that this would be your experience. I was promised. When I was thinking about this and thinking about I was promised, so there's that, and then there's the promise, maybe the way that we turn this around is not to say I was promised, but to say I am the promise. If you think of it that way, you're taking it away from somebody else is responsible for my life, somebody else owes me something for my life, I'm not getting it because of them, and saying, what if I am the promise? Now you're turning it around and becoming active and saying, how do I make this work for me? Ralph Waldo Emerson said in his essay, The Conduct of Life, he said, a man's fortunes, so the things that you bring into your life, are the fruit of his character. So who you are is what you get. A man's friends are his magnetisms. Magnetism meaning the thing that you are an energetic match for, those are your friends. Nature magically, not magically, we know, it's science, suits the man to his fortunes by making these the fruit of his character. So we say that something is outside of me, I was promised this. If we look at this instead and go, no, it is my character that creates the results of what I want. So then I come back to the question of, how do you do this? Okay, that's fine to say it's my character. How do I do this? What's a tool that I could use today? So Kevin mentioned it's been a great summer for movies that have to do with superheroes and that have a, in my estimation, very positive message and an affirming message for our time. So I want to go to the movies and talk about one other movie that happened this year that I loved equally as well as Superman, which is the Fantastic Four movie. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things, and this is the reason why the talk of the flying cars was finally, we got our flying cars. Because if you've seen the movie, you know that the Fantastic Four has this flying car. And what's cool about this movie is it's sort of set in this retro, futuristic, like what the 60s could have looked like if we'd when we imagined them in the 50s. And so this car is this like cool vibe of like a 60s car, but it flies, and that's cool. So here is the Fantastic Four standing outside their car. So the reason that I bring this movie up, and I've seen it twice, both times there's a scene that I just lost it in. Cried. I mean, actually several scenes, but there's one, and if you Google this, you'll see many people were impacted the same way by this scene. There's a scene in the middle of the picture where the characters are asked to make an impossible choice, like a Sophie's choice. I'm not going to give it away, but society is like, it'd really be better for us if you made this choice. They're saying this to the Fantastic Four, and they're like, we can't make this choice. It's impossible for us to make this choice. And this scene happens right in the middle of the picture, where all the people in the town have gone to where the Fantastic Four lives, and they're like, we need you to make this choice. We're thinking about us. Very sort of race consciousness experience. And so the main character, Sue Storm, goes out to face them. And I didn't catch this the first time I watched the movie, but so she goes out to the plaza where their tower is, and out in front of the plaza, there's a little circular area with a statue. She climbs up onto there and addresses all of the people. Now, if you know anything about like movies, if you're the director, everything is within your control. And if you make a huge movie like this, everything is intentional. There's no accident as to why things happen the way they do. There's an intentionality behind the creators, the director, that this is the way he wants to compose the scene. And this is the way that scene looks, or it should look. I don't see it on the screen there. Oh, there we go. Okay. So bring the lights down just a little bit. So in this scene, you can't see it real great, but that's Sue Storm in the middle. And surrounding her are all of the people who are demanding that they do the thing they want them to do. And what you can sort of see behind her is this idealized statue of what the Fantastic Four looks like. So she's standing next to the statue as she addresses all of those people. Completely not an accident that it happens that way. And I say that she's surrounded by all the people. At the beginning of the scene, they're mad. They're saying, why won't you do this thing we want you to do? And if I see this here, essentially those people represent race consciousness. They are saying, we're fearful. We just want you to do the thing, which is kind of selfish, and we want you to do it. And yet she says, no, I'm not going to do that. And I draw your attention again back to the statue. The statue is the ideal. If you look at it, it is the idealized version of what the Fantastic Four looks like. And so what she's saying is, this is what she draws strength from. And she gives a speech where she's talking about her father, not a coincidence there either probably, where she says this about him. She says, he wanted us to be together because that's what a family is. So together, a family is together. So we're talking about togetherness. She goes on and says, It's about fighting for something bigger than yourself. And not fighting as in conflict, but standing up, putting one foot in front of the next and saying, this is what I stand for, this is what I won't accept, and this is what I will accept. And then she says at the end, it's about connecting to something bigger than yourself. It's exactly what we teach here. Oneness, the idea that we are all connected together and that we are all part of this same family. This is a big theme in the movie, is family. And so come back to saying, I am the promise and we are the promise. So everyone in this room, you are the promise if you live that way. So I go back to growing up in Tomorrowland and the experience that I had feeling that way. I talked about at the beginning how we went to the moon. And the day that choice was put before us was September 12th, 1962, in a speech given by John F. Kennedy. And he said, we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they're hard. And I'll get to that in a second. It doesn't have to be hard. But the idea that he was saying, and it's extraordinary, we were not anywhere close to being able to go to the moon in 1962, when he laid down this marker. And yet, in less than 7 years, a man was stepping on to the moon. That's the power of choosing. That's the power of decision. Going back to the idea of it doesn't have to be easy or hard, Ernest Holmes said, nothing is great or small to the divine, so we should never wonder if what we're going to do will be easy or hard. There's actually 3 places in the Science of Mind where the word wonder occurs. This is one of them. So it doesn't have to be easy or hard. It's our thinking of it, as Emerson said, that makes it so. So go back to the 1960s, and lest we think that the 1960s were all like it was, Tomorrowland. It wasn't. We had the decision to go to the moon, but we also had division. It was an era where there were things that challenged us. And as I thought about that, I'm like, well, in some ways, that has been our history. There's always opportunities, and there's division. But it's our choice as to what we do with those. So I go back to the choice. And I go back to that quote that Dr. Tiffany and I talked about. This is the quote. And I want to highlight the part in red where he says, I put one foot in front of the other, and I try to make the best choices I can. That's how you do it. Put one foot in front of the other and go, what's the best choice I can make right now in this moment? I mentioned in the talk, in talking about Fantastic Four, there's a statue. So question, why do we put up statues? I tried to Google to see how many statues there are in the world. Impossible to know. But you might be surprised to know that by some estimates, just in the United States alone, there's over 50,000 statues or monuments. So why is it that we put up statues? What is it that's the power of that? Here's one that a lot of people know, the Statue of Liberty. I think we put up statues, and the reason why in the movie that Sue Storm is standing in front of the statue is because that's the place where we remember who we are. It is the place where we remember the ideal of who we are. If you could not go by this in the morning on the Staten Island ferry and not see that and go, oh yeah, that's what we stand for. That's the ideal. And sometimes we can think, oh, it's the big thing that we're doing. It's the huge thing. I don't think so. And what's fascinating, going back to the movie Superman, there's a scene, tiny little scene in the movie that I read about that was contested in the filmmakers when they were deciding whether or not to ultimately include this little bit in the movie. Because some people said, oh, it's kind of silly, would that really happen? And the director said, no, this represents who the character of Superman is. And the scene doesn't involve a human being, it involves a squirrel. There's a scene in the movie where, in the chaos and mayhem of everything that's going on in Metropolis, this squirrel is about to be killed. And of all the things that Superman could focus on, he focuses on saving this squirrel. He swoops down, grabs the squirrel, and puts it down so that it'll be safe. The director had to sort of justify this to people who are like, should that really be in the movie? And he's like, no, that absolutely should be in the movie because that reminds us who we are. It's not just the big things, it's all the little things that matter. You could make a choice today or tomorrow that impacts someone. You may never know. Maybe in your life it's metaphorically the squirrel where you may not see the impact of it, but if you live your life that way and you think about your life as every single opportunity is something that you can impact someone big or small, do it. In the last week, speaking of statues, they unveiled a statue in Cleveland to honor the creators of the character of Superman. They actually created Superman in Cleveland, so this is just unveiled in Cleveland. Again, those are the two guys who wrote it, and someone, I can't remember her name, but also one of the creators. So they were there to unveil a statue, and this is the statue of Superman that they unveiled in Cleveland. So go back to the idea of thinking about your life, and go back to think about the speech that Sue Storm gave, and imagine that she's drawing energy from that statue around her. She's remembering who she is, the ideal version of who she is. And what if you lived your life where knowing always behind you, there's a statue which reminds you who you are? And so that whatever you do, you always go, I'm going to put one foot in front of the other, and when I do, I remember who I am. I remember the ideal version of me, and that when I do that, I remember who I am. So, I wonder if it's possible that you could go out into your life now, and whether it's something big or something small, if you think about a way that you can draw energy from that ideal version of you, that statue version of you that says, this is what I stand for, this is who I know I am, and that from that place, when you put one foot in front of the other, you do it knowing that you are acting from the divine, you are acting from that knowledge of who you are and what's possible for you. And when you do that, I promise you that when someone says, look up in the sky, it's going to be you seeing yourself. Namaste.